Just how tone deaf can this government get? I think we're finding out. Recently, we've had the Department of Integration put out a tender to builders, developers, landlords and property owners for vacant housing. Buildings which are planned with full planning permission but are not built will be considered, as well as those which need renovations and those in turnkey condition are all listed in the tender. So basically everything from derelict buildings right up to turnkey properties are being sought. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking that this new drive was to tackle the current housing crisis that we've been experiencing for quite some time, especially with another new record set in March of 13,866. But you'd be wrong. It's to house the record level of asylum seekers. Now I don't know about you, but that doesn't sit right with me for a number of reasons. Chief among them, the aforementioned housing crisis. Our monthly homeless figures are record-breaking more often than not, and that is with heavily massaged figures that only account for those staying overnight in emergency accommodation paid for by the Department of Housing any night in the reference week. This excludes rough sleepers, couch surfers and other hidden homeless, for example. So a very narrow definition of homeless, and yet we are still breaking records. Our President, Michael D. Higgins, is on record as calling our housing crisis a housing disaster, and I think that's a very accurate description of what is going on in Ireland. So why in God's name has a similar can-do attitude never been invoked for the homeless? Why have we never seen a tender like this before to house, even temporarily, the thousands of homeless we already have? It's stuff like this that breeds resentment, and then the government and the media have the cheek to act surprised when the electorate get angry. Now before I continue, I need to address an issue I have with the article in the Irish Independent that revealed this new tender. When I first read it, it neglected to mention that the tender, which I have linked in the description below, was only for properties with over 150 bed spaces. Now I didn't have the presence of mind to screenshot the original article, as I had no reason to believe it would be changed. The new version of the article is structured differently to what I remember when I read it aloud to my husband when it first popped up on my Twitter timeline. There are also no notes on the article to say that it was edited, which I find odd. Surely transparency is needed to foster trust in the media. Luckily, Ben Scallon of Grip Media did take a screenshot to answer a question posed to him on Twitter, and you can see the difference in the two versions of the article. The original article, which neglected to mention that the properties must have over 150 bed spaces, prompted a lot of backlash, as you can imagine. It read as if the government were going to be buying up any and all properties they could get their hands on, which would put them in direct competition with the huge numbers of young people trying in vain to buy or even just rent a home. With the mandatory minimum bed spaces, this becomes less of an issue, but at a time when apartments to rent are few and far between, this would seem to put the government in direct competition with potential renters, as you'd imagine apartment buildings would be a prime target, especially when one of the desirable requirements is independent living / self-catering. In fact, all of the desirable requirements read as if they are clearly targeting apartment blocks. So while not as bad as initially feared due to the original wording of the article, it's still definitely not a good look, and ultimately I think people would be slightly more forgiving if this tender was a temporary measure to help ease the housing crisis. Worse again is that the time limit for receipt of proposals is 28 of the 4th, 2025, which suggests that this is a long-term plan to deal with the ever-increasing numbers of asylum seekers entering the country. Indeed, a new plan by Cabinet would see 14,000 state-owned beds by 2028 for international protection applicants. Absolutely tone-deaf. So what, the government are just going to keep buying up properties ad infinitum for the ever-increasing arrivals, in stark contrast to what people actually want? Now look, I can't be hypocritical and say that all polls accurately reflect what the population thinks. I mean, you just have to look at the polls in the run-up to the recent referendums to see that, but when the polls are as consistent as they have been, it certainly indicates a trend, doesn't it? Last May, we had the Red Sea poll that showed that 75% felt the numbers of refugees Ireland is taking in is too many, and 65% of people believe the system for processing international protection applicants is too slow. Since then, poll results have repeated similar sentiments. In February, 59% of people favoured a more closed proposed immigration policy to reduce the numbers coming into Ireland. And just last month, a poll revealed that 79%, or just about 4 in 5 people, believe the number of immigrants arriving into Ireland is too high, with 61% of the public feeling that the government is not taking their concerns on the issue into account, and 64% are worried that the government is not in control of immigration into Ireland. So it's fair to say immigration is on the minds of quite a lot of people, and in a shock to absolutely no one, the government are not listening to the people. So par for the course really. What people want based on those polls is tighter immigration control and quicker processing of applications. Buying up blocks of properties and continuing to pay out massive money to hoteliers and other property owners, both commercial and residential, to house migrants is hardly in line with the wants of the people. In fact, it seems to me like it's funneling state funds into the hands of the already wealthy. Buying up properties is not the solution to this issue, especially not during an ever-worsening housing crisis. Faster processing and decision-making is what's needed, with deportations for unsuccessful applicants that are actually carried out, and more stringent use of the Dublin 3 regulations. We cannot repeat the scenes we are seeing in Dublin at present, with hundreds of asylum seekers given tents and then shunted along when they land in the quote-unquote wrong area. I mean, from a basic human standpoint, it's inhumane if we cannot provide adequate accommodation for asylum seekers who are awaiting a decision or to even make the initial application, then we simply cannot take more in, as putting them in tents is not the answer. It's that simple. When the bathtub is overflowing, you don't reach for the mop first, you turn off the tap. We need to have a sustainable solution to immigration, and what we are seeing is not it. It would appear that there are failures at every step of the way and a chronic waste of money at every juncture. Instead of throwing money at the symptoms and barricading all of Dublin to avoid a tent city, we need to focus on the cause. While I have zero issue in allowing a sustainable number of genuine refugees into the country, it is obvious that the current system is wide open to abuse, and this is the cause of most of the problems we are seeing. Anyone, anywhere can claim asylum, but once again, language is important. Claiming asylum does not automatically mean you are a genuine refugee, and until your claim is heard, no one can know whether you are genuine or not, which is why a quicker system is needed. Those who are here knowing that they are not fleeing persecution should be labelled correctly. They are economic migrants. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with economic migrants. It would be fairly hypocritical of Ireland to claim otherwise, given how many of our own move abroad for economic reasons. And before people start jumping down my throat, hear me out. While there is nothing inherently wrong with economic migrants, that is only true if they apply through the proper channels and take the proper legal route to get here. An Irish person cannot just rock up to Australia or the US, for example, without going through the proper visa application process and expect to be let in. And the same should be true of Ireland, free movement of people aside. Ireland is a generous, soft touch when it comes to immigration, and as a result, our asylum process is wide open to abuse, and the world knows it. If you would be turned away through official channels to come and live in Ireland, then it would appear that you just have to claim asylum and wait it out, and you'll be looked after throughout regardless of who you are or where you've claimed asylum before. Well, until demand outstrips supply, that is, which is what we're seeing now. But even then, our government is moving mountains to try and house those asylum seekers on the streets. So there are inherent issues with how we handle asylum seekers here in Ireland. I understand the reasoning behind why claiming asylum is listed in the Declaration of Human Rights, I get it, but unfortunately it is open to abuse. People who otherwise would not meet the criteria to come here legally as economic migrants are clearly using the asylum process to circumvent this, which not only puts a great strain on a country with poorly executed immigration control, such as Ireland, but it also means that genuine refugees are at risk of being lost in the shuffle. It's like when someone decides to go to A&E for a minor illness instead of going to their GP or out-of-hours doctor. It needlessly clogs up a system that is already under strain and should be only used by those who really need it. We also have to ask ourselves the very serious question of whether Ireland, being such a soft touch, is enabling people trafficking into Ireland. We have generous benefits for our asylum seekers compared to other European countries, and with little in the way of deportations and a well-funded NGO sector willing to fight their corner, it all makes Ireland a desirable destination, and the ridiculously lax immigration systems we have are just wide open to abuse with no real checks on who enters Ireland or follow-up. We have seen children go missing after arriving in Ireland. How is that not worrying? The Rwanda policy has put a tremendous strain on an already creaking service, and as usual, the government's solution is to throw money at the problem. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the government just want to funnel taxpayer money into the hands of landlords, the property owners, and the asset hoarders. And it's that sort of thing that adds to the unease and resentment felt by the ordinary, struggling people of Ireland, while a tone-deaf government looks on and wonders why. Why not, instead of spending millions upon millions on accommodation, why don't we hire more staff, even on a temporary basis like we do with the passport office at peak times, to work through the backlog of applicants so that we can make decisions quicker and act on them quicker, set up satellite offices to deal with the overflow, and streamline the system so decisions are quicker. Remember, all of these tenders are not for housing refugees, but are instead for housing asylum seekers who may or may not actually be economic migrants. Instead, we have Simon Harris waffling about how the tent situation is not acceptable and will not be allowed to happen again, while every other day new sites pop up, get cleared out and barricaded. Is that what he meant? To play Tetris with tents? We have Helen McEntee, who was warned in 2022 about the knock-on effects of the UK's Rwanda policy, and yet did absolutely nothing proactive about it. Everything this government does is reactionary, and that's just not good enough. We have Minister for Integration Roderic O'Gorman's department setting out tenders for properties for asylum seekers in spite of the chronic need for supply for our own homeless. And we have Minister for Housing Dara O'Brien not lifting a damn finger to address the housing crisis in the first place. Absolute shambles, and tone deaf to boot. So what do you think? Do you agree with the new tender as a solution to the immigration issue? Does the tender being for properties with at least 150 beds make a difference to your view? Do you feel the government are listening to the people? Do you believe the current system for processing asylum seekers works? Or do you feel, like I do, that just like everything in this country, it's an absolute shambles and a black hole for taxpayers' money? And just how tone deaf are this government? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified of new content. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or a super thanks, which is greatly appreciated. And a huge thank you to those of you that already have. You can also follow me on Twitter. Until next time, slán go full.